Hello. Now, I think I've mentioned before Jean Perizot de Valette in my last video, but I wanted to touch more on a point that is, I think, really important, especially going forward and giving, look, there's bad times coming. Exactly when, nobody knows, but, the economy has to collapse at some point because it's a Ponzi scheme. That could be a long while. I realized that the economy was going to collapse because it was a Ponzi scheme in about 92. 1992, I did a little bit of trading, like on shares and so on that I knew were going to do well. And then I realized how that world worked. And I really only dabbled in it. If you've ever read a book called Liar's Poker by the same guy who wrote The Big Short, which was also made into a film, I very much had the same sort of sensation, although I never worked in a bank and so on. I just did it by myself, but I sort of rubbed shoulders with traders and people like that for a bit. And what happened was that very, very quickly I realized this was a complete scam. So I stayed away from it. I just said, nah, this has got to collapse. Now, that was in 92. I didn't know when it would collapse. And if you had asked me, to bet money on when it would probably collapse, I probably would have said within the next few years, probably by 98, 99. Now, there were dips. There were definitely sort of big dips that happened around that time, 95, 96, 98, so on, in South Africa, where I lived anyway. But I thought it was very much a global thing. Now, the crash happened in 2008. So that was a long time. That's like 16 years. And I thought it was going to happen within the next few years. So I was out by like more than a decade, probably. And I can see the same thing coming now. It's like, it's definitely going to collapse. Now, I don't know when, and I'm kind of really hoping that it's way down the line. I'm hoping that if I can see this now, and people, bankers even and so on that are in the know, have been saying it's going to come crashing down like, a few years ago already they were saying this. So eventually it'll happen. Now, it might happen in 2035, it might happen tomorrow, it might happen in 2050, who knows? But it is going to happen. Now, when that happens, and if it happens on the catastrophic level that I expect, there's going to be chain reaction of catastrophic stuff going on. Now, I don't put a lot of stock in prophecy or anything like that, but I just finished reading that book on prophecy, which had a couple of passages in there that I found really interesting because they're really sort of identifying what's going on today, and these things were prophesied, hundreds of years ago in some cases. So it was interesting, and a lot of the times there's also the mention of upheavals such as earthquakes, tidal waves, and so on. Again, normally I wouldn't put any stock in that. However, there is something happening in 2020, which is the four phases of the sun are all going sort of out of sync at the same time. The last time two of these went out of sync, we had an ice age. We're going to have all four go out of sync next year. And so I wouldn't worry too much about global warming. There is another thing that I've been thinking about for over 20 years, and that is the switching of the poles. Nobody knows exactly how that happens. North Pole to South Pole inverting has happened many times before. There is geological records in the earth that show us this, that prove it. But exactly how it happens, no one knows. And people thought, oh, it was quite gradual, but the latest information seems like it can be quite sudden. And if you ever seen a film called The Day After Tomorrow, I think it was called, that shows a sudden switch, of the poles where things get frozen instantly. Now, the fact is that things as big as mammoths have got frozen instantly because they've been found with like half-eaten little flowers in their mouth. They were frozen in the tundra and they get defrosted and they have food in their mouth that hasn't been decomposed yet. So it's like, well, how the hell does that happen? It has to be frozen solid in a very short period of time for that to happen. So especially an animal as big as a mammoth, fully frozen through, not rotten and so on. So it is kind of weird. And the North Pole has been drifting for the last 20 years a lot, and it seems to be exponential. It seems to be increasing, because I tracked it in the phase on Mars. I mentioned it. That was 26 years ago, something like that. And 24 years ago. Yeah, 24, 25 years ago, something like that. And it had been gradually increasing. The location where magnetic north was had been gradually moving faster and faster, and it's moved again in the last 20 years quite a bit. So I'm thinking all of these things happen simultaneously. That's worst case scenario, right? It's the perfect storm. You get the economic crash, you get the polar switch hitting, which would undoubtedly set off all sorts of catastrophic events like tectonic plate movements, which would cause huge earthquakes, huge tidal waves, probably volcanoes wherever these are. The safest spots are going to be spots where most people don't want to live, like the middle of the Karoo, which is, a huge tectonic, it's the middle of a huge tectonic plate. You're probably going to be safe there. Or Bolivia, but who the fuck wants to live in Bolivia, So it's an interesting problem. And if and when such a thing happens, how do you think that civilization is going to survive? Because, mark my words, something that has become eminently clear in the last few years since I've become Catholic is that a sense of community will not hold purely based on generic goodwill that doesn't have a very sound basis in some sort of belief system that goes well beyond material world stuff. For example, the people in so-called Silicon Valley, those motherfuckers are going to be eating each other alive, apart from the fact that most of them are pussies, so they will be eaten alive by whoever lives near Silicon Valley. But do you honestly think that those, rich.com guys that have, I don't know, I don't know these people. I'm just going to throw a couple of, you take a Tim Ferriss, a Kevin Rose, those guys who've got like plenty of money and live in a sort of bubble. Now you put them all on the so-called desert island and, it's going to be Lord of the Flies. Those people will not work together. 2 or 3 of them will work together, and 2 or 3 of the other guys will work together, and then you're going to have competing little cliques, and they will eat each other alive. That is what happens. Now, you put a bunch of Catholics on an island together, a few of them might get beaten to death, but generally speaking, if they are real Catholics, they will pull together. They will help out the weak, and they'll say, look, you're a weak bitch. You can't do fucking anything, so you sit here and you make shoes. That's your job. We're going to give you some leather. We'll go and kill the animals. We'll get the leather from the skin of the animals, and you make the shoes, man. That's your job, because you can't do anything else. And, a woman, okay, you can't hunt because you're weaker, and maybe you got a little child. Okay, you just cook the food. We'll bring you the food. We'll look after your kid. We'll make sure you're both fed. That's how it works. And of course, I'm talking about pretty drastic sort of situations. But the thing is, imagine the stresses that you have now in the so-called modern life, maybe because of money, maybe because of some argument, maybe because you argue over who wants to watch what on fucking Netflix, right? And you have those stresses in your relationship, in your family, whatever. They're over idiotic shit. Imagine when the fucking meteor hits, yeah? You think that that's going to work, that you're going to stick together? No, it's going to be hell, right? So what's going to keep things together? That becoming a hardcore Catholic is definitely one of them. And the beauty of it is that you've got historical precedent. Now, the thing that I want to make really clear here is this. Going forward, the run-of-the-mill churchian isn't going to matter. The run-of-the-mill Catholic is going to matter a little bit, because he's going to be your villager. But the only people that are really going to matter are going to be the clergy and the fighters. Now, the fighters, the Catholic fighters, have always had a very distinct, clear relationship with the clergy. That's why in games like, Dungeons and Dragons, you've got clerics and paladins, right? You've got knights and fighters, and where you've got fighters, then you've got paladins and clerics. Why? because the paladins sort of serve the same god as the clerics. So the fighters, the Knights Templar, the Knights of Malta, those guys, they were Catholic. They served the same god as the priests. And keep in mind that in Catholic thought, killing is always wrong, even when it's justified, because it is not the way of God, it is not the way of love, and so on. But sometimes in a fallen world, that's what you need. And make no mistake, if you had not had Catholic fighters, there would be no Christendom. If you had not had the Jean Perisots, the Normans that freed Sicily, 40 guys coming back from the Crusades without even weapons and armor, came into Sicily, saw that a city had been taken over by Muslims, and they were like, nah, this is not right. Give us some weapons and armor. 40 of them, just 40 of them, kicked the shit out of the Muslims, took over the city back, gave back the armor and the weapons, and carried on the way home. Those are proper Catholics. Now, do you think that these guys were like spotless? No. I mention this also because it's quite a funny thing with the stuff that's going on in our little mission church and so on. A couple of people have, they've tried to attack my character, whatever, my scandalous past, my scandalous present, my scandalous future, whatever the fuck. And, one of these guys, one of the guys he's a nice guy, he's a young guy. He pointed out like, hey, you should be careful about, causing scandal or being scandalous or so on. It's a sin, it's a mortal sin, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, the guy means well, don't get me wrong. He's a good guy and everything. And I'm certainly, I only have good things to say about him. And he's right, sure. But, take a guy like Bohemond. Bohemond was one of the knights and his nephew was Tancredi. Tancredi was one of the most well-known crusaders. He was the guy that actually led the charge into Jerusalem. And, they were accused of all these atrocities and whatever. Again, a little bit of license there. I'm sure some, poor little Muslim women and children probably got trampled and killed as well. But you need to understand what the Muslims did to the Christians for centuries. Yeah, how many millions of slaves they took, boys, little girls, women, and killed them in. Now, this went on for a long time. So when they took Jerusalem, that a couple of the knights went a little bit overboard, probable. I would expect it. I would say it would be weird if it didn't happen. But it certainly wasn't riding through the streets in rivers of blood to the level of the bridles of horses. That's absolute bullshit. It's hyperbole written afterwards by people, academics who want to discredit and disparage the Catholic faith. Now, these guys, like Bohemond, for example, he took over Antioch by subterfuge, by bribing one of the captains of the guard that were inside Antioch. Was a Muslim-held was a fortress that had been built by the Christians, and then the Muslims took it over when they took over all the lands. And then when Bohemond came there and said, "No, I'm going to take that back," he didn't have enough men to even surround the whole city, and yet he took it over by bribing one of the captains of the guard and whatever. When at a subsequent fight, Bohemond's father was captured, and the Muslims brought him up to the walls and said, let us in, otherwise we're going to kill your father. Surrender, otherwise we're going to kill your father. Bohemond shouted from the walls. He shouted, "My father's lived long enough. Carry on." And the Muslims were so shocked they didn't even kill his father, and eventually they let him go. They said, what kind of a son have you got? He doesn't give a shit. If we're going to kill you, he's not going to give up. He's going to keep fighting us. And, when some of his crusaders ran off, quite vile people, I can't remember if it was, somebody, William the Penniless and Peter the Hermit, I think, who were also massacred Jews on the way to the Crusades. They weren't good guys, let's say. And when it got tough, they ran off. They wanted to go back home. Tancredi, Bohemond's nephew, went and captured them, brought them back, and Bohemond humiliated them publicly for a while. But he didn't kill them because he sort of needed the men, So, and there's another point you need to keep in mind, which Rodney Stark makes in a hilarious fashion in this book. It's a brilliant book. If you haven't read it, read it. It's really good, well written, simple to read, and covered in references. But anyway, in there, Rodney Stark talks about how precisely because violence is, frowned upon and killing is a bad thing. Knights and so on would often have to do penances for the fact that they were killing people, so it's not like in Catholicism, there's never a wish to avoid punishment. If especially if you did something wrong, you're going to get stick. That's just how it works. So it's not hypocrisy at all. It is an understanding of human nature which is superior to the others, because it knows that you're going to fail, you're going to be flawed, and you should try your best not to. But if and when you do, if you truly repent, if you truly turn back, change your ways and so on, you'll be forgiven. Not just by a priest, obviously, but by God. So, and that's the intent. And you have to keep in mind, Christendom would not exist if we had not had people like Bohemond or like Jean Parisot Valette or Tancredi or many, many others. And, so when you put it in the one point that Rodney Stark makes that's hilarious in the book is he goes, well, the knights always had to do these penances for all sorts of things, but, there's a limit to everything. I mean, the whores never left encampment, because along with the armies of knights and crusaders, followed, the peasantry, the soldiers, and invariably the whores, because where there's soldiers, there's going to be whores. So, no, these guys are not all saints. I mean, some of them have become saints, some of them have been made saints, but aside from that, they're not, pardon me, they're not whiter than white. They're not clean, puritanical sort of guys. War is a messy, disgusting thing, and so's life. Some of these guys went there with their whole families, their wives and kids died on the way. It was hard lives, and so when somebody says, oh, you give scandal because you talked back to a bishop, well, so fucking what? Keep in mind, again, if you are of the warrior class, you know the rules of the church. You absolutely know the rules of the church. And if you break some of the rules of the church, that's on you. That's on you, maybe the people under you, if you're, say, a military leader. If you're a knight, your house maybe can fall into disrepute. Maybe your children can be thought of ill. But it ultimately really affects you, maybe some of your men, if you've got men under your command. If you're a cleric and you don't follow the rules of the church, you are essentially putting the faith in danger. And at that point, anybody, and by the way, this is Catholic law, anybody can correct someone who's affecting the faith, and especially a clergyman. If a priest or a bishop or something steps out of line, starts to not follow canon law, bad enough if they don't follow it in temporal matters. Of course, if they don't follow it in spiritual matters, that's even worse. But anybody, the lowliest peasant, can point out heresy or law breaking in a cleric and shout it from the rooftops. There's no shame in that at all. Now, it's true, you can have some kind of nosy, pokey neighbor that, is trying to look through your curtains all the time to see if, I don't know, whatever, I'm just going to say a stupid thing. If you have sex with your wife in the right positions, because otherwise it's sinful or something, I don't know. That's just somebody who's got too much time on their hands and should worry about their own souls rather than yours too much. But the thing is, if you are of the warrior class, you have to try and follow the rules as best you can. But ultimately, your point is to protect, expand, protect when it's being attacked and expand when it's not being attacked or when you have the opportunity to. Christendom. Expand your community, make your community safe. The safest way to make your community safe is to enlarge it. Once you've got, if it's your household that's Catholic, that's, a few people. If it's your whole neighborhood that's Catholic, well, now you've got something going. And if it's your whole city that's now Catholic, now you've got really something going. Now you've got all sorts of power as a people that you didn't have before. You've got buying power, you've got trading power, you've got all sorts of things. So I'm going to put a link to a site that somebody, one of the commenters, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who the commenter was, but one of the commenters put a link to a website that lists all the valid Catholic priests and masses that you can find around the world. I don't know how up to date it is, but it's pretty good. I sort of went through it, so that'll be a helpful thing for people to look at. I'm going to put it in the comments, the link. It's called something like Lux Vera something, Lux Vera something, which is the true light, something like that in Latin, you know. Anyway, so that's my point. You know, if you're of the clergy, then be good. Be of the clergy that you can follow all the rules. If you are, I don't expect any clergy to be watching my videos, but you never know. And if you are not of the clergy, if you are of the laity and, you know, you're a villager, fine. Be a good villager, raise your kids well, be a good neighbor, be a good friend, support the warriors, support the clergy. If you're of the warrior class, you gotta fight, buddy. You got to fight, you got to go out there and spread the word, you got to, you know, resist and go up against. And in today's world, going up against means speaking out when you got, you know, the transgender hour in libraries or some crap like that. It means doing what the Muslims did in Birmingham when they said, oh no, we're going to teach all the kids about the LGBTQ, pedo, whatever. And the church got, the school got surrounded by Muslims who all took their kids out of school, said, well, our kids are not coming here, and you're not teaching them that shit. Well, guess what? Church, you know, the school changed their tune all of a sudden, and they're going to try it again, you know. But everybody knows that if you've got a school that's got like 600 Muslim kids in it, and you try and teach them, you know, gay, pedophilia, or whatever, ironically enough, because there's a lot of that going on in Islamic, in the Islamic world, but funnily enough, we all know what's going to happen to those teachers, because Muslims will not hesitate to, you know, cut their heads off or whatever when they eventually have enough. And so nobody dares to say anything against them. And instead, you know, the Christians are just keeping quiet and letting things happen and, oh, turn the other cheek. No, that's bullshit. That's churchianity. If you're a Christian, you're not going to let your kid be mal-educated by these evil people. And, you know, there's people that send me comments or emails where they're actually doing that. You know, one guy took their kid out of a so-called Catholic, you know, Novus Ordo school and said, no, fuck that. You guys are not following the truth. My kid's going to learn proper, true Catholicism, and you've got nothing to do with that. Took their kid out of school and is homeschooling. You know, awesome. Awesome guy, awesome family. So that's the thing, you know, and don't lose heart. Find each other. Find each other, even if it's just online. Find each other. Create little communities. That's why I made that, you know, that comment. There's a guy now, John, who's going to get your emails if you want to become, if you want to learn about, you know, martial arts and Catholicism all rolled into one. I don't have a particular plan. I just want to see if people are interested in it. There's about 1,000 something people subscribe to this channel. So I don't know, maybe 100 of them watch every video or something like that. If we get 10 of those that are in London or nearabouts enough, great. And if you're not in London, maybe we can still do something. You know, we can still do videos with the guys here that also helps you guys out there. Something like that. I don't know. It's just an idea. Maybe it won't fly at all and there's no interest, and then that's fine. But anyway, that's the concept. So keep in mind that all your so-called heroes, you know, whether it's a guy like Bohemond, a guy like Tancredi, a guy like Jean-Pierre de Valette, they're all flawed. The difference between warriors and normal people is a warrior doesn't get cowed by the guilt of their sins when the clergy says so. If you do watch that iconic film, The Mission, and if you haven't, I strongly suggest you watch it. You know, it's a bit slow by modern standards because our attention span now, thanks to mobile phones and the intentional brainwashing, is like 3 seconds or whatever. So, you know, it might look a bit slow to you, but it's a brilliant movie. And you will find that in that film, the warrior character does not care that the priest forgives him. It's got nothing to do with the priest. His sense of guilt or whatever is not contingent upon a priest saying, oh, you're absolved of your sins. He knows it's on him. It's his own sense of what's right and wrong, guilt. And he knows what's right and wrong. and he knows he's done wrong. And I know that feeling, it's like when you live a certain way all your life and then you have your road to Damascus moment or something happens and you become a completely new, different person. And it's like the stuff that used to be okay before just isn't. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be a saint all of a sudden and you're going to be all, never make a mistake again or never say a wrong thing again or never do a wrong thing. And again, if you see in the mission, there's a lot of people that would say that the character played by Robert De Niro reverts back to sin. I think the character played by Robert De Niro does absolutely the right thing. And I don't think that what he did is sinful at all. What happens towards the end of the film, I think, is absolutely correct. I do believe that there is a penalty to pay for acting that way, but that's none of the priest's business. That's none of anybody else's business. That's between me and God. That's going to be my lot in purgatory. So if you are a warrior class, generally you'll understand what I'm saying. You'll instinctively have a feeling that, like, yeah, that's where I'm at. Now, that's not license to go and do all sorts of disgusting things. That's not license to say, well, I'm a warrior, so of course I cheat on my wife and I fuck 3 whores every week because, STDs don't matter when you're a real man. It's not. That's not what I'm saying, right? You're still gonna do shitty things. That's on you. But what I mean is, if you are fighting for a purpose that the intention is to spread the faith, protect the faith, or correct erroneous clergy, or ensure a good, avoid scandal, or create an unfortunately necessary scandal in order to correct a bigger error. There's all sorts of situations that you might have to deal with, where you might have to act in a way that is not perfect or maybe not even very good. And it's difficult because, there's that saying, oh, the ends don't justify the means. Now, I think that's a stupid statement, stupid thing, because in my mind, the ends always justify the means. It's a simple cost-benefit analysis, right? How much does it cost you to do something and what do you get when you get it, And again, in the cost column, I'm not just putting money or time. I'm also putting spiritual things like, what is the weight of that action on your soul? What is the error that you do that you have to carry for the rest of your days if you go that route? And what is the benefit if you succeed? And what are you left with if you don't succeed and you fail anyway? And you got to accept all these things. You got to think these things through before. So I think that's an important distinction to keep in mind. And if you think that you are of that warrior class or you want to be or whatever, there's going to be a lot of posers, I suppose, and I presume, because that's been my experience in life. But, try and get together with somebody or drop me a line and let me know that you kind of understand what I'm saying here. Because the idea is communities of proper Catholics are small and few and far between, as you'll see from the links that I put in the notes of this video. There is at least one priest in most countries that is still a real Catholic, but they're few and far between. So creating a community around those people is going to be quite a challenge. But I invite you to take up that challenge. Become a little enclave. And when you've got a little enclave, whether you're one guy or 3 people or a group of 10 families, drop me a line, because we want to create a little network. A network that is eventually going to be global in size and distance and so on. That's what you should be trying to do, every one of you. So, get to it, immortals. There's your orders. Have a good day.